This is Data Malarkey, the podcast about using data smarter. Every organization is driven by data, but how can you turn it into powerful storytelling? By asking the right questions, discovering the insights, and building your data story. This is the podcast that talks to leaders and thinkers around the world about how they use data smarter, so you can too. Welcome to Data Malarkey.
Well, hello and welcome. I'm your host, Sam Knowles, and joining us today is Laetitia Zinetti, who is Regional Vice President for Southern Europe of DoubleVerify, a company that's on a mission to build a better advertising industry, helping brands to improve the effectiveness of their online ad spend, giving them clarity and confidence in their digital investment, something I think that maybe has been lacking for too many years. And I think one of the things in talking to Laetitia, one of the things that DoubleVerify is all about suitability, the suitability of the environments in which brands are exposed. And that's a topic that we'll definitely come back to shortly. Now, Laetitia and I first met more than a decade ago when she arrived at Ebiquity, the independent media investment analysis business, and she came to run the Paris office. And in almost 13 years with the business, she rose to be Ebiquity's MD for Europe. And before that, Laetitia's career was focused on transport. I don't mean working in transporting, but in media, marketing and communications roles, first for the Australian national airline Qantas, and then for the Nissan Motor Company. Now, Laetitia, welcome, first of all, to Data Malarkey. Fantastic to have you here.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for inviting me.
Now, I trust that's a good summary of who you are and of what you do, but is there anything you'd like to add or anything that you say I've got wrong or you'd like to expand upon?
No, I think you got it. I think potentially one thing I'd like to add is something that I have been undertaking last year. As part of my job at Ebiquity, I was asked at that time by our CEO to support in building a sustainability strategy for Ebiquity, and I had the opportunity, because I'm kind of the person I don't like to work on something which I am not knowledgeable enough, and I had the opportunity to take a course at Cambridge Institute in business sustainability management, which was really, really interesting, and it was very much about how do you embed the sustainability strategy, in your overall business strategy. So not like something nice to have, but something that is part of everything you do. And it was a very interesting course, and I would absolutely recommend to anyone interested in the topic to look at it.
Sounds a brilliant course. You're not the first, and I'm sure you won't be the last person that I've spoken to who's done a course there. It's getting a better and better reputation, really becoming a centre of excellence for that. So that's really interesting to hear. Now, before we get kind of down and dirty with data, I'd like to ask you a question that doesn't necessarily, it's designed to get you to say more about yourself rather than about what you do, although, you can do. But Laetitia, first of all, I'd like to know, how do you spend your time?
I think I would describe myself as a multitasking woman. I'm trying to juggle work, relationship, kids, and everything in between within the finite time and resources. So it's kind of why you will always find on my desk some kind of to-do list, where I would list all the tasks I need to perform, both professionally and personally, ranked by importance and urgency. But also on this list, you will always find some kind of blank box, where I can write down some ideas that are coming up during the day or during the night, not really, but more during the day. And so that I just don't forget them and I can go back to them when I feel like it. And I think it's about potentially, balancing rigor and creativity, ensuring I do what I need to do, but not kind of, leaving me enough time to also think a little bit outside the box.
I love the idea of the blank box. I in work that I do in training in insight and insightful thinking, I encourage people to have means of recording what thoughts may come to them at the strangest times. If I had shares in a company that sells crayons for the shower, as well as kind of post-it notes and pens, I think I could do well. So that's that. I love that blank box. Can you tell me about the role that data plays in your day-to-day work? I mentioned in the introduction I was particularly keen to expand on this idea or this concept of suitability, which when we talked before, when setting up this podcast, was a term I'd only just begun to hear in the field of data. But tell me about the role the data plays in your work, and particularly about suitability.
Yeah. So just before we talk about DoubleVerify, previously in my previous job, data was already at the heart of everything I did, and especially when you work for an auditing and consultancy company, you have to ingest a lot of data in the platforms in order to perform the services you want to offer to your clients. But also in my leadership role, in charge of a regional P&L, there was a lot of data, which is a mix of internal data from a sales, financial, HR perspective, but also external, looking at trends, predictions, competitions, really to help, supporting my annual plan and kind of being efficient and effective in terms of driving the business. Now, coming back to your questions more about my current role at DoubleVerify, well, DoubleVerify is a software company, so obviously it's very much a combination of tech and data. We collect billions of data, which are called impressions, because it's data related to digital advertising, and so it's not, without going too much into the tech details, but it's a little pixel that you add in the creative ad that allows you to kind of monitor a lot of things, but more specifically, really understanding if the impression is not fraudulent, is in a safe environment, is in the right geography, and very much looked by a human, not a robot. And finally, which is brand suitable, and this is what you were talking about, is very much, and it's so important at the moment to ensure that brands are advertising in the right environment, which is suitable for their brand. So obviously there's no definition, one definition of brand suitability, because depending about what you are communicating to which audience, on which product, the definition of brand suitability will vary. But it's very much about, digging into the environment. Is it cluttered? What is the key topic being considered in that page? So really providing the right environment to advertise.
One thing, that there was a lot of talk in recent years. There's been a lot of talk about blacklisting and keywords and so on. It sounds to me as though brand suitability is a rather more nuanced and subtle concept. I mean, for example, I think when we were talking before, one could say let's ban everything to do. Let's have a blacklist that says we'll have nothing to do with COVID at all, because COVID's depressing and people don't want. But actually, if there's positive news about vaccine, or could you maybe give an example or two about how this suitability concept moves beyond simple blacklisting and whitelisting of keywords?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're absolutely right in mentioning that this goes way beyond keywords. And just to go back a little bit to the technology behind, it's obviously a combination of technologies that will allow, to kind of understand what's the context, but also it's about semantic science. So really understanding, we have about 40 linguists that are able to look at all context and codify them. So to your point, initially when COVID started, brands were really not really keen on having any advertising, linked to any COVID environment. But nowadays, if you were doing that, it would be really, really hard to reach your audiences because COVID is kind of everywhere. But the work we do beyond the keyword is really understanding in which context we're talking about COVID. To your point, it could be about vaccines. It could be about how do we live nowadays with COVID, because it's still kind of there. But at the same time, we don't want to be amongst, a messaging which would be very negative about number of deaths or very pessimistic or negative, discussion around COVID. So, and it plays a lot in different things. So, for example, recently we were talking about a luxury brand, which, we were talking about cooking, and cooking, is an interesting topic, but while the brand was very keen on being on YouTube or another platform around cooking, where Ducasse, for example, would be presenting his new recipe, at the same time it wouldn't be suitable to be advertising on cooking for a little boy cooking with his nanny in the kitchen. That wouldn't work for this luxury brand. So this is why it goes way beyond a topic or a keyword, but really understanding, in terms of suitability, the context that the ad would appear on.
Very good. No, I think that's really encouraging, given some of the messes that there have been, and some of the ways that some brands, some companies have kind of tied themselves in knots and maybe lost opportunities that could have been very helpful to them. Now, you talk about the was it billions or trillions? Certainly big data sets of impressions that you're analysing. Can you just describe to the non-specialists, those that don't work in marketing, who are listening or watching, what sort of data is most important to you in your work? Can you just unpack what you mean by those impressions to our listeners?
Yeah. So as you described initially, it's about making the digital advertising ecosystem stronger, safer, more secure, and really preserving the fair value exchange between the buyers and the sellers of digital media. So so we're talking about digital. When we talk about digital, we're talking about the web, but we're also talking about the mobile. We are talking now about connected TV. And it's very much about, ensuring these impressions are visible. So obviously there are some standards, which are dictated by IAB, which is a number of seconds and the percentage on the page, where the ad appear. Because sometimes for different reasons, you could scroll down, change of page, and only 20% of the ad would appear. So there's obviously a minimum of time and a minimum of display to ensure the message went through. I mentioned about fraud. Fraud is still very, very important because maybe when you're not working in the advertising industry, you're not really conscious of that. But having, there's a lot of fraud around advertising. And a risk that actually it's a fake website. There are different type of frauds, but it could also be some kind of robot actually clicking and not a proper human. So obviously we have technology behind to ensure, even if these robots are very clever, to ensure that we make sure this is really a non-fraudulent impressions. Right geography is important as well because, the web is international, but when you are a national brand, and for example, you are advertising in France, even if in Canada they speak French, if you're selling your product only in France, you don't want to be paying an impression on advertising that is actually delivered to someone in Canada because it's just, not effective. So right geography can be very, very important. And finally, brand safe environment, as we discussed, ensuring that this is the safe. So what I mean by safe, the difference between safety and suitability. Safety would be more, you don't want to be around violence, or disinformation's websites. Suitability would be more, as I mentioned before, around the brand suitability, about having the right environment for your brand. So, all this data is so also important, and the purpose of this data is really to help maximize the return on investment of the digital advertising, drive campaign quality and effectiveness. So I think as a summary, what I would say is that it's quite hard to separate data from tech.
Sure.
They work together.
What you've touched definitely you've touched on some of this already. Are there any specific challenges that you face in making sure that the data is useful for you, ensuring it's clean, it's intact, it's usable? Are there any specific challenges that you face at DoubleVerify for that?
Well, as a software company, I guess you never stop investing in making sure that the data you are ingesting, are mapped, analyzed, and ensure that they are clean and intact before you use them. But I would say our challenge sits more potentially with the access to data rather than, so obviously access to data sometimes can be limited because of technical reasons, there are so many channels and so many technology behind advertising that sometimes, for technical reasons, but also there's another reason sometimes, some platforms are not inclined to provide all access, such as the walled gardens we've been talking a lot in the advertising industry. So full transparency is still an important topic. So I would say, the challenge sits more with the access than having clean and usable data.
Got you. And I mean, does that? I mean, obviously, given the extreme amount of both e-commerce and social media usage, I was going to say countries like, but there are no countries like China. I presume that in terms of some of the platforms like WeChat and Sina Weibo and so on, you face challenges in actually getting access to them at all because they're controlled by the Chinese government that doesn't want them used in that kind of way.
No, there is no access in China.
There's no access.
We do not operate in China.
Fair enough.
None of technology company in the ad verification world can operate in China.
Fair enough. I get you. Let's shift gear a bit. I want to talk a little bit about insight and how you move from data to insight. I mean, I'm a bit of an insight nerd. I mean, for me, insight is this kind of profound and useful understanding. It allows us to say, kind of, so what? This is what the data means, and then allows us to go on and ask maybe the more interesting. Now, what can we do as a result? Where in your case, I guess, can our clients advertise more effectively, get better return on investment? Thinking about your role and those that work in your team, how do you what do you do to move from data to insight?
Yeah, I think I mean, once again, we are very much working in the kind of reputation minefield of global advertisers to ensure, that they're not advertising, and there is a very high volume of unsafe and unsuitable content online. So that's very much where we're sitting. But also, we are in a very dynamic and unpredictable nature of digital realm. So it makes really critical to ensure brand content is aligned. So the data we gather, allow us to provide insights on all the topics I mentioned before, including brand safety and brand suitability, in order to protect brand equity and reputation. So the data we provide helps, gather some insights that will help advertisers challenge, their media plans. So obviously, if one of the environments or one type of websites or type of publishers, is providing numbers that, do not fit or are not brand safe or brand suitable, then these insights will help them to readjust, their plans to deliver better business outcomes. So also what is very interesting is that, as you may know, a lot of advertising now is bought on a programmatic basis, so auction-based. And what we are offering now is actually almost near real-time comprehensive data to drive campaign performance. So actually, you can readjust the plan before it's actually being bought. So it works with milliseconds, but it's a very dynamic campaign optimizations. So it's not so much only about, measuring post-campaign and thinking, wow, I shouldn't have advertised there and there, but actually before the call is made for the auction, based on the technology and the insight, the data and the insight that have been gathered, you can make an informed decisions, which actually impact the outcome right away, because it makes the decisions before the call is made for the advertising.
I think that sounds really impressive, and I love that there's sort of almost no opportunity for buyer's remorse on the part of the advertiser, because the considerations that maybe historically, and I know I'm kind of I'm not looking back into the mists of time, but if we're thinking about buying campaigns in monthly magazines or just on television, but the analytics also was kind of rear view mirror. It was looking in the rear view mirror to say, this is what we've done and this is what we won't do in the future. But you're talking about actually being able to get those insights almost near real time, so that you don't even have any opportunity. You don't need to. The buyer's remorse can be a thing of the past in the advertising world.
Yeah, it can, but obviously, the ecosystem keeps changing, and
sure,
what was fraudulent an hour ago is not fraudulent an hour after. So it's just very, very complex and dynamic. So it's not like you do it once and you're good. It's just like, all the time you have to optimize.
Thinking about effective communication, I'm thinking about effective communication within your own organization, but also in communicating the reporting and the near real time analytics and platforms that you're providing to your clients. What do you think is the best way of combining narrative and numbers, stories and statistics in your reporting and the guidance that you're giving to your customers?
Well, I think they can't really be separate from each other. They kind of it's very much about how do you translate data into insights and insight into actions, and I think that's the way it goes. As far as we are concerned, a lot of the data we provide are based on a self-service platform that clients can access. But obviously on a regular basis as well, we do what we call QBR, just to really, every quarter for our key clients to really understand, from the data, what are the key insights we can take out of it, so that they can take the actions, or the agency partners can take the actions according to it. So, we are very much into the data. I would say the narrative is on a regular basis, but I think the data speak for themselves, for them to kind of adjust what they need to do.
Can I, as somebody who always wants to have an acronym or an initialism in a brackets, can you just tell me what your QBR is?
It's quarterly business review.
Okay, I was going to suggest reporting, but good, very good, thank you. And in that quarterly business review, but also kind of ongoing through the dashboards, how do you take active steps to avoid overwhelming your customers with data? Because it's in some parts of the research and analytics world that I come into contact with through training, through coaching, through mentoring, there can be a temptation, because the smart platforms and the smart individuals designing those platforms have done all this research and have found all this out. There can be a real temptation to share every piece, every finding, even if it doesn't have anything actionable associated with it, and a temptation to say, look at all the workings out we've done, when of course all the client wants to know is, what should I do? How do you avoid, both through your human reporting and through your online reporting, how do you avoid overwhelming your customers with data?
No, I think it's a very good question and a great challenge. Well, first of all, the way our platform has been built, there is, it always starts with the executive summary. So I would say, it works for any audience that comes to the platform, and they can, in kind of 3 minutes understand the situations. But obviously the technology is behind if you want to dig into and cut and slice all the data you need. So depending on, if it's, someone from the agency partner digging into, they can access all the data. But if you are a client, and obviously you have a limited amount of times to check on how your campaign are performing, in a very quick way, you can access the kind of key information. So it's the platform is very user friendly, very easy to use. You don't really need, any training out of that. And it's very important because, to your point, our clients have access to so many platforms, and at the end they just don't go anywhere because they're not finding it useful. When it comes to the QBR, I think over my 20-year experience, I have tried to avoid the kind of death by PowerPoint. The team is really working on a max 20 slides, ensuring we come in with the key outlines. And once again, I heard from the team, because I joined recently DV, that we used to be a measurement company, like a bit like an insurer. We are now moving to more an optimizer. And how we are offering our services is very much more than do I measure it, our impressions are visible or brand safe, but more answer the questions, are they delivering business outcomes? Because this is what advertisers are interested in. If I invest X amount of money, I want to make sure it drives sales, or it drives my brand equity. So our reports obviously are built in that way, really ensuring we drive the right insights that will make them understand, in which area, which site, which formats, which environment they have a higher chance to deliver the best business outcomes. That's the way we built our reports. We have actually a marketing team just dedicated to support in running this report. So they are really good at digging all the data they can find within the platform, but bringing them back in a very comprehensive report that will give the right insights in 20 slides.
I think your 20-slide rule is an excellent one. I love your description of death by PowerPoint. I remember once being in a market research debrief run by a very big market research company who will remain nameless, for a very big global consumer goods business, one of the top two, and the client observed as the market researcher was plugging in their laptop, observed that it said slide 1 to 162, and he said, "Oh my God, this isn't death by PowerPoint. This is genocide by PowerPoint. We're gonna." And he politely suggested, in fact, he didn't politely suggest, he closed the laptop of the market research and said, "Can you just tell me what I need to do?" But I think your which threw the researcher, but to her eternal credit, she was able to do that and actually became a person transformed. I think your 20-slide rule is a very good one. I'm always encouraging people to use the appendix. Not tease them so that they're confused, but get them interested so they say, "Oh, that's interesting, because that wasn't like that last quarter. What's changed?" You want to encourage that dialogue rather than kind of parade your scholarship and say, "Aren't we clever? Aren't our dashboards clever?" And it sounds the way that you've built your dashboards as well, that you can get a top line summary, you get the executive summary, and if you're intrigued, you can quickly get in there, which I think is a very smart way to do it. I have what might be called a Columbo question, kind of just one more thing question. Is there anything in the way that you and your teams work with data that I haven't asked you, that I should have asked you?
We touched on a little bit, but I think, maybe talking about, how technology versus human intelligence work. I think it's an important question, and that's what I was mentioning at the beginning of the discussions. And this is something that really interested me when I joined DB. Is, as I said, the semantic science team. So it's very much, how do you build AI-driven ontological tools, that power, brand safety controls for advertisers. But having these human interventions to ensure that it's matching with brands' appropriate and relevant content. So I do believe at the time where we're talking a lot about AI and machine learning, there is something we need to kind of be conscious of is what's the role of human intelligence in this world.
I think it's a fascinating debate. I have to say, I know lots of people are feeling threatened. I'm sure your teams are not only not feeling threatened, I'm sure they're feeling kind of empowered at what they're going to be able to do that they don't have to do today, that they can get on and do other interesting things. What's the worst example of a misuse of data that you've ever observed, either in your own career or perhaps more broadly in the public domain? Do you have a shining or rather a stinking example of a misuse of data?
I think maybe one example in my career that I remember in my previous role was potentially one day where an econometric modeling was created for an auto client, and the objective of these econometric models was to look at internal and external factors. So, for example, it could be the pricing, it could be the marketing activities. How does that relate to the sales? So kind of understanding, if I invest X amount of money in that way, how much incremental sales this is going to be delivered. And out of this report, you would look at the results and you would say, wow, TV is way more efficient than digital. It's really driving sales. We're getting the scale we need. And therefore, as a client, you would say, okay, I'll invest all my money, in TV because this is where I need to be. And at first sight, you could go away with this insights and move on. But actually, fortunately, some experts digged into on this much further and realized that it wasn't so much that TV was more powerful than digital. It was just that digital was poorly executed. It was the wrong channels, the wrong timing. It was within the digital world, it's very much about fragmentation. So if you do a little bit of everywhere, then you just don't stand out. It's dilution of investment between search, display, video, influencer strategy, I think the outcome is that if you don't dig into things, if you don't interrogate the data, if you don't look at it from different perspectives, then there is a high risk, and that was the case in that one, that you come up with the wrong insight. So I would always say, challenge, interrogate the data, build different scenario in your recommendations, because, you could play with the data and it can be interpreted in many ways, and it can end up, to very, very wrong assumptions, and poor actions because you haven't done that.
The hidden third cause, I think as a species, as a cognitive species, we're always looking to try and find the if and then contingencies. What is it that has caused this? What is the relationship between this? And the temptation to conclude, because one lever is being pulled, something is happening, therefore it must be that did it. It is almost too strong. Almost finally, do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, I think I have a question, and it might be a simple question, but I think it's always one where I struggle is potentially, do you have like a magic button or a recipe or a piece of advice to kind of provide simple insights, simple recommendations when you have a very high volume of data, different sources? How do you stay focused? How do you synthesize? How do you make it eligible for your audience? In other words, how you don't get lost in the data jungle?
So that we could be here for about an hour and a half, maybe until next week. But let's try and make it simple. I think that would be a first golden rule, to keep it very, very simple, to make sure that the questions that we ask are not only of the data that we're collecting are not only, I don't mean simplistic, but they're simple and that they're clear. I think in terms of blending with that lens of simplicity, and the questions that we ask and the stories that we want to tell, I think one of the fundamentals you've touched on a couple of times, which is this blend of it's kind of AI times HI, artificial or augmented intelligence, with the overlay of human intelligence. Because I think that we respond to stories. We the way that we explore and make sense of the world from very earliest age all the way through our lives is wanting to make sense of the world through stories. And the way to blend narrative and numbers together, the way to make stories and statistics sing, is with that lens of simplicity, to be human and empathetic and understanding in the way that you are expressing that. And what that tends to mean, it's not data hostile at all, but it means that, we were talking about kind of overwhelm, and I was asking you about how you avoid overwhelming. It's using the tools and techniques that have been around for millennia, certainly, in terms of, clearly, because that's the way that we respond to story, and particularly to tell stories or to investigate scenarios that are about the real human potential that can be achieved as a result of working with your company, with my company, with anybody's company. So that means that the case study, the Harvard Business Review case study of the problem solution outcome or challenge solution proof, that goes back to the Aristotelian beginning, middle, and end. That's what drives us. That's what captures our attention. If there's a part of it missing, if there aren't, if there isn't an inciting incident that gets us going, and I'm talking kind of almost, in Hollywood terms, if there isn't something that we start off on our quest and then there isn't a resolution in the way that we feed that back, then that's going to be a real challenge. But simplicity, humanity, and empathy would be my trifecta. Now, tell me, thank you for the question. I like it very much. I hope it gives you some satisfaction. I hope I've answered some part of it. Finally, can you tell our listeners, our viewers, where they can find you online? Obviously, I'll include something in the show notes, but in social media, tell us where they can find out more about you and what you do.
Yeah, I mean, mainly on LinkedIn, I would say, and I will also be attending some advertising and digital trade events this year in France, Spain, and Italy, which is the regions I cover at DoubleVerify, and trying to leverage some piece of research we are conducted currently, because I think when you can have a third party, analyzing, what you do and really understanding also from the consumer, because there is a high chance when you are working in advertising that you just work in your ecosystem, but at some point you have to go back to the consumer about what they want, what they feel is suitable for them, and what what kind of advertisings make an impact. So it's going to be an interesting year, and a lot of new topics and innovations coming for us.
Very good. Well, we'll share the link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes, and I'm sure you will make sure that you're sharing where you're going to be revealing that research. Sounds really good. We call this podcast Data Malarkey. Malarkey, a slightly cheeky word meaning kind of nonsense or rubbish. Not because anything that any of the guests say is nonsense or rubbish, but actually, I think the digital advertising world, and this is the first episode where we've looked in detail at this area. I think there has been since the dawn of websites and web advertising and banner advertising, but in the way that it's developed, I think there's been a huge amount of, shall we say, malarkey in this world. But I have to say, Laetitia, if there were more people like you and what you do, there would be much more common sense and much less data malarkey in the world. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a great year on the conference circuit.
Thank you very much, Stan.
Thanks so much for listening to Data Malarkey, the podcast about using data smarter. To find out what kind of data storyteller you are, why not take our data storytelling scorecard? It takes just 2 minutes to complete and will give you a personalized report right away. Visit data-storytelling.scoreapp.com or follow the link in the show notes.